Hi, and welcome back to Can I Be Honest with Megan Colman. Today's episode, it is my turn. I do my best to open up to you guys about what my motherhood journey has looked like this far. After, meeting Peter, having our first son, getting married, and having our second. So hopefully you learn a little bit about me and my family and feel more connected to my story. Okay, so it's just me right now here with both the kids. I don't know. I guess I'm just gonna start. I met Peter when I was 23. There's 10 years between us, so he was 33. And actually, we met through a mutual friend. It was Cinco de Mayo, and she invited me out. She was going to Chevy's with her then boyfriend, and he and Peter were friends. So whatever, Peter was there too, but he was actually there with a girl that he was dating. And at the time, I had just recently gotten out of a relationship, kind of like the only other serious relationship I've been in before. And so I was also like, had it in my brain that I was moving to San Francisco to be with my friends, because that's where all my friends lived. And so I was just like, peace bitches, I'm out. So when I met him, I was not like in a headspace where I thought that I was gonna be dating anybody anytime soon. According to him, he knew when he met me that night, like, that he was super interested. But I was like, dude, like, you're here with someone? Anyway, I guess they kind of ended things like right after that night, and he asked Elena for my number, and I said no. So then I went to San Francisco, and 30 days later, I came home like in the fetal position, crying on the floor. Like, it was absolutely terrifying. I could not stay in the city, so I came back like immediately. When I did, I went out with friends again who knew him, and so he was there. We really hit it off that time. I had a great time with him that night, and I was like, oh, I guess like I really might like this guy. But then another month went by and we didn't see each other again. And so the same mutual friend that introduced us the first time, Elena, I was hanging out with her one day, and she was like, hey, do you want your job back at the restaurant that she and I used to work at together? She managed. And she was like, if you want it, you can have it back. You just need to show up to interviews like everybody else, and then you can have your job back. And I was like, cool. So I went in for my interview that day, and
Where's the key?
Where's what?
There was the key at home. What that in key was here? I eat that all the way my key at.
I don't know where your candy is either.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so anyway, so she's like, come in for interview. So I show up, walk in, and coming around the corner is Peter, and we're like, hey. He was the general manager for this restaurant because it had changed ownership and blah blah blah. So I didn't know all of this took place. So I came in and he interviewed me, and then I got the job, and he and I started dating. Early on in the relationship, he made it very clear to me that he had no plans to get married. He never saw himself getting married. He didn't want to get married. He actually told me he didn't believe in marriage. And I don't know why. I was just kind of like, oh, okay. Because that was something that I knew. I always knew I wanted to get married and I wanted to have kids. Like, that was my plan in life, like major goals for me. And so the fact that like I'm dating this guy, he's 10 years older than me, he's been on his own for so long. I was still living at home with my parents, like obviously I didn't have a clear career path. I didn't go to college. Like all I knew was that I wanted to get married and have kids. And now he's telling me like, oh no, I don't want that. But I don't know, I really liked him. So I was like, okay. I remember I told my mom, and this was before she even met him, so she was like, no, okay, well, you got it, that's the end of that. I was like, it's fine. And then 8 months later, we moved in together, and then like immediately got a dog together. So he already had a dog, and then we got another dog. So we had 2 dogs and in our house, and I was working. He made me quit the restaurant because he was like, I'm not dating an employee. So then I quit there. I went back to working for a medical company that I had worked at previously. And then I was also bartending. He left the restaurant business and got into the company that he's working for now. And we really just kind of started to build this life together. We were, you know, we had our house, we had dogs, we did, every holiday was together with both of our families. And it was just like, we were building this life. And then right after I turned 25, so at this time we had been together now, I think, so I turned 24 like right after we started dating. And then we moved in together, and then I turned 25. And then, so we were together like a year and a half, I would say, and I found out I was pregnant. I mean, it was a surprise. We weren't trying. I don't know. It's hard to say if something like that is a surprise, but I had a lot of issues with birth controls, and I was having a tough time finding one that worked for me. So at the time, I wasn't on birth control at all. So I guess it's not really fair to say it was a surprise, but we weren't, I was surprised when I found out. And so I called him. I got up and I was getting ready for work, and I just took the test, and I looked at it and it was positive, and I just remember sitting in the bathroom saying, oh my God, over and over again. Obviously to myself, nobody was here. And I called him, and immediately when he answered it, I regretted it right away. I was like, I shouldn't be doing this right now over the phone, and I'm like, I just took a pregnancy test. It was positive. And he was just kind of quiet for a minute, and he goes, can we talk about this later? And I was like, yeah. And I hung up and I got ready and I went to work. I told people at work, because I'm just not somebody who, I can't keep secrets like that, especially my own, you know what I mean? Yeah, and so that night he came home and we went to dinner, and we just sat there and kind of stared at each other for a while, and then we were like, I guess we're having a baby. I was so excited. All I've ever wanted. I've waited for that moment for as long as I can remember to find out that I was pregnant. So I was very happy. But of course with that came like but we're not married, and that's not even an option, you know? And so I tried not to focus on that too much. I just really wanted to be happy and excited. And I always knew like Peter was gonna be an amazing dad, and I was like, we'll figure it out. I was super, obviously very naive at the time, and didn't really think about everything that went into being parents, you know? I was just so happy I was having a baby, and I was gonna be a mom. So at the medical office that I was working at the time, I really wanted to get into the marketing position, and once they found out that I was pregnant, that kind of went off the table. And so I was like, I already knew that I was gonna be a stay-at-home mom. And so, and right before I found out I was pregnant, I just bought a car, and so I bought a car and then the bar that I was working at closed, so I lost that job. But then I still had the job at the medical office. Then I found out I was pregnant like a month after that, and once they found out I was pregnant, they were like, okay, so marketing's not gonna work. Well then, I'm just gonna leave now. It's what I thought was the best option for me. So I just got a part-time retail job during my pregnancy. And our plan was I was gonna be home for the first year of Maddox's life. And yeah, so I was working part-time. We went from, I was, working my 2 jobs, and we were just living life as a couple, a boyfriend and girlfriend, and splitting everything. And like, I was financially responsible for myself, and he was financially responsible for himself. And then it was like, the bar's gone, I'm pregnant, quit my job, here we are, right? Like, he went from just like having this girlfriend that he lived with to like, now she's having my baby, and now I'm financially responsible for her and this baby, and like, I don't even want to get married. And so I'm on the other side of that, like, fuck. It was just kind of a lot all at once. So we didn't really talk about any of that stuff. It's just like what it was. And so I had a lot of insecurities at that time surrounding like money, and just the fact that like, he knows I want to get married, and like, but I know that he doesn't, and we're having a baby, and everyone around us was so supportive and so excited. But it was just like, it was just a little weird. And so I was working part-time, and then at 7 months I was put on bed rest because when I was pregnant I would have like really strong contractions like all day every day. Starting around like 6 months is when they started, and then I went in for one of my appointments and he was like, oh, you're contracting, and I was like, yeah, I do that all the time. They weren't painful, but they were uncomfortable and just really, really strong. And obviously I've never been pregnant before, so I didn't know that it wasn't normal. And so he got concerned. They actually kept me overnight at the hospital, and that's when he told me, you know, like, I don't want you to go back to work. He was afraid that these contractions were gonna put me into labor too early, so whatever, in which they didn't. But so now I'm at home 7 months pregnant. I don't have a job. Maddox's due date was November 16th. And then on the 12th of November, I was doing everything that I possibly could to try and put myself into labor, and it wasn't working. I was pissed off. I spent the whole day, you know, walking and walking and walking, and actually that day my contractions pretty much stopped. And so I was like, really, like, I contract my entire pregnancy basically, and now when I'm really trying to give myself these strong contractions, they just stopped completely. And so I was mad, and it was like 9, and I remember we were at my parents' house, and I looked at Peter and I'm like, I just want to go home, like, I'm tired. And he was like, okay, let's go. And we got in the car, and my parents' house is like maybe 3 minutes from ours, and on the way home I had my first like real painful contraction. So we went in and they sent me home. They gave me a pill and told me to go home and get some rest, and they sent me home, and I was just like distraught. My plan was to not get an epidural, so all I kept thinking was like, if it's supposed to get worse than this, like, there's no way. So I came home and I got in a bath. Peter went to bed, so I literally crawl out of the bath and like hands and knees dripping wet. I can't even talk at this point. I'm just like crying. I was 4 centimeters when I went in, and they decided to keep me, and I was just like dying. Jeez.
I'm Maddox.
Yes, you're Maddox. I was dying. Like, I didn't want to look at anybody either. If you're someone who didn't have an epidural, you're either one superhuman or like a psychopath, and I question your life choices. But I was like, I need one. So I got an epidural, and my entire, just everything changed. Best decision I ever made. And yeah, and then he was born, and it was like just obviously like the most beautiful day of my life, one of them, and he was perfect. So yeah, November 13th, Maddox was born, and then 2 weeks later was Thanksgiving, and his family was here. Well, his mom and his brother were here, and his niece, and we had Thanksgiving at my parents' house with everyone, and he proposed. So obviously it was kind of like a, are you sure? But according to him, you know, like the day that Maddox was born, and we were filling out the birth certificate and seeing that it said, you know, Peter Colman, Maddox Colman, and Megan Looper, he was like, I can't go on through life, you know, the rest of our lives, knowing that I never made her a Colman. Like, this is my family. So that's what changed his mind, and I can't think of a time in my life that I've ever been happier than those first few months of Maddox being born and being engaged. He was a perfect baby. I think the only complaint that I had, not a real complaint, but the only one I had was he was breastfed exclusively but would not take a bottle. We never really left him, or I never really left him, which was fine. And I was a stay-at-home mom, and it was just the best thing ever. And you know, but in the background there was still like the insecurities that I had, of course, financially. Like, here I am now just at home all day every day with this baby, and I'm not working, and I'm not bringing in any money, and we were fine, but it just wasn't ideal. And so I struggled really hard. I didn't understand how hard it was gonna be, like, even just thinking about leaving him with somebody else, let alone the cost of childcare is insane. And so we talked about it a lot, and we kind of hit a point where we were like, I should get a job. But I just, like, honestly, it wasn't an option for me. I was like, I'm not leaving him. Like, it just isn't gonna happen. I'm not doing it. Luckily for me, my mom worked for a company where they had work from home positions, and so I got the job, so I was working from home. And at this time, Maddox was 7 months old, and I know that I've been open before on social media about the fact that I've dealt with postpartum depression and anxiety, and I believe, looking back now in hindsight, this is where my anxiety started for sure. Maddox is 7 months old. We are planning a wedding. I'd been out of work for however many months, a long time, and I took on literally everything. You know, I kind of just felt super inadequate in the financial department, so I was just like, I got everything else. I got the house, I've got the kid, I've got the grocery shopping, I've got the dinner, I've got the laundry, the cleaning, the everything, and no problem, I'll just work from home. And like, I got the wedding planning, I got it all. Like, just leave, let me do it, you just go to work. And I got everything else, and felt like that was my job. So yeah, I was very anxious all of the time, and I didn't really understand why. I just kind of thought that I just sucked. Why is this so hard? I don't understand, like, why? And I really honestly started to think like something is wrong with me. Why? I should be able to do all this. I actually thought that didn't happen to anybody else. Like, everybody else had it figured out. I really didn't have any help. My parents are very helpful, but they had their own lives, and not to mention, I was learning this new job. I would have trainings, you know, and everything was over the phone or on the computer. And so I had this 7-month-old with me while I'm trying to focus or trying to be on the phone and trying to learn this job while still worrying about everything else that was around me. It just got to be a lot, and I really honestly didn't see that. I thought that, like, why, like, this job is super easy. Like, why are you stressed out? What do you really do all day? Like, that's how I was talking to myself. So Peter didn't really understand when he would come home and I would just lash out. I was angry, I was upset, and I was upset at myself, but I didn't realize that, like, I needed help, but I refused to ask for it because I thought that I was just failing. I really didn't talk about it to anybody because, like I said, I didn't want to admit to anybody that it was hard. I wanted it to look like what I always pictured it to be. When it was overwhelming, I was embarrassed or like ashamed. I was like, this is all you've ever wanted, so like, why do you feel this way? Which was so normal, but I didn't think it was. And then we got married. Our wedding was really nice, except for being introduced as the Connors instead of the Colmans. That sucked. At this time, Maddox was 10 months old when we got married. Yeah, things were really great. After the wedding, we were really happy. Balanced life out. You see him? I'm watching him in the camera. I had kind of balanced things out. I had come up with a routine when it came to my work and his schedule, and everything was just kind of working out. Yeah, so we got married in September. Maddox turned 1 in November. I found out in February, why can't I say that word? I found out in February that I was pregnant again. What's funny about this pregnancy was that when we found out that Maddox was a boy, Peter said, okay, so we're gonna have another boy, and they're gonna be 22 months apart, which means you have to get pregnant the January after he turns 1. And I was like, okay, bud, sure. That was his dream. That's exactly what he and his brother are. And so we knew that was coming up. We had to talk about it. Actually, in January, I remember being in the car, and the same day that we talked about, I told him, you know, like, I feel depressed. I think that I might have postpartum depression. And I was feeling really, really, really bad about myself. I kind of just all of a sudden started to realize that I had completely lost myself. All I was mom to this baby, and I was like confused because that's all I ever wanted to be. So I was like, why is this bad? Why am I sad about this? But I started to kind of freak out. I was like, I didn't go to college, I don't have a career path. I have this baby now who I love more than anything in the world, and now I'm realizing I wish I was better. Like, I just wished I was a better person, I guess. I hated how overwhelmed I felt. I hated the fact that, like, wasn't making money. I hated the fact that I didn't know what the hell I was gonna do once, like, I did go back to work. I started to, like, I would have nights where I remember, like, laying in bed. And this sounds insanely dramatic, and like it is dramatic, but this is just the truth. I remember laying in bed, and so Maddox, we co-slept, and so he was in the middle and Peter was asleep, and I just remember laying there. I was crazy, like I couldn't escape my own thoughts, and all I wanted was to like not be me. It's so weird to say out loud, and it's hard to explain, but like I actually just kept thinking like, I just don't want to be this person. Like I love my baby more than anything in the world, but I don't like me. Like I hated me. And it's the weirdest feeling to hate yourself, because like I said, like it's just so like contradicting. And so I was really like at war with myself and my brain, and I remember laying in bed one night and like bawling my eyes out as silently as I could. And that's the night I got up out of bed and I sat in the other room and I looked up postpartum depression. I found out that there's such thing as late onset postpartum. So that's where I thought it was coming from, and now I'm not so sure. I think it was just a mix of a lot of things. But yeah, I was super depressed. I remember trying to tell Peter, but like I don't think I've ever told anyone about what I just said. Just, you know, told him I thought that I had that, and it freaked him out. He didn't understand it, but he was super like, well, how can we fix this? What can we do? What can I do? How can I help? And I really didn't have any answers for him. I was just like, I don't know. I just want you to know that this is how I feel. So that day, same day, we started talking about, well, January is here, and you know, we had that crazy idea that we wanted to get pregnant this month in order to have our second one, you know, 22 months apart. And do you still want to do that? And we came to the conclusion that day, we were like, look, we're not gonna try. If it happens, then it was meant to happen. If not, immediately next month I'm giving out birth control. We won't have this conversation again until we're ready. February, I had my friend Alexa over one day for a play date. She was really my only friend that I had to confide in about everything. But we've always been super close, and then we got pregnant at the same time. And we were both having boys, and they're born, you know, 3 weeks apart. And so we just went through everything together, and she was really the only person I had to lean on. And so she was over one day, and I just remember I was explaining to her everything that I was feeling. She was like, you're pregnant. I was like, no, I'm not. And I kept laughing at her. I made Peter bring home a pregnancy test, and I put Maddox to bed. We had just had dinner. I poured myself a glass of wine, went to go sit on the couch, and I looked at him and I was like, you know what, real quick, I'm just gonna take that test. And it was positive. And I just like, I didn't believe it. And so I just sat there and I was like, what is happening? And so I come walking out and I'm like, it's positive. And he literally looked at me and said, okay. And we stared at each other for a second, and he was like, sat back on the couch and pressed play. And he was like, are you gonna watch? And I was like, no, I don't think you heard me. This is crazy. Like, Maddox is a baby, and we're having another baby. Like, this is insane. And he was like, I don't know why you're so surprised. Like, we talked about this. And I was absolutely terrified. And I immediately just felt guilty for not being as excited as I was the first time. I was excited, don't get me wrong. I love being pregnant, but I was scared. Things had gotten really overwhelming with me trying to work from home and have a 1-year-old. Didn't really feel like I was making enough money for it to be worth all of the stress that it was putting on me, plus dealing with like feeling super depressed all the time. And I didn't realize that those went hand in hand. Like, I didn't think it had anything to do with me working. I actually thought that working would have been better for me, because I thought it was gonna be like an outlet, and like I would feel better about at least contributing a little bit, but it was stressing me out. And my dad was opening a body shop. So, you know, I left my work from home job to go work for my dad at the shop. And so at this time, you know, Maddox is 1, Peter and I are married. Now I'm pregnant with our second. I mean, my pregnancy physically was easy and enjoyable for the most part. I spent a lot of it questioning just seriously everything. Normal things that you go from your first baby to adding another, there's a lot of emotions that you go through. You feel guilty for, you know, them not being the baby of the family anymore, but you're so excited to expand your family, you're excited to have another baby, but then you're like, you know, it's scary. Like, how am I gonna do both and blah, blah, blah. So it was just different. And I was afraid of the depression that I was gonna feel once he was born. Never really dealt with it, that it was just gonna come back again, and I was afraid of that. The end of my pregnancy with Oliver was just kind of crazy. Some doctors called me 4, some doctors called me 5 centimeters dilated for the last like a couple weeks of my pregnancy. The last appointment that I had, she told me, if your water breaks, you're not gonna make it. Like, this baby, his head is right there, you're already so dilated that the second your water breaks, like, your baby's gonna come out. So I'm like, I just got really scared, and I was like, no, I need to go in. So I went in. So I'm in triage, right? That's what it's called. She checks me one last time. She's like, yeah, you know what, you're good, we'll keep you. Let me just go get the paperwork and we'll get you moved into a room. She walks out, and I'm like, oh, thank God. And I look at Peter, and immediately just labor. They moved me into a room. My mom got there. Everything happened within like 2 hours. So I get an epidural right away. The epidural only took on the left side of my body. It was super weird. So I could still feel everything on my right side. So every time I had a contraction, I could feel it. And so they're trying to like turn me. This made me really sick. And it was not enjoyable at all. Peter calls a nurse and is like, hey, my wife is getting really sick. No, my mom steps out and tries to flag someone down. They're like, she's like, she's getting sick. And they're like, oh, okay, someone will be right there. And then, you know, I stopped and I was feeling better. No one came in, and I'm sitting there, and then I'm like talking to them. And I'm like, man, that sucks. I feel so much better now. My water breaks. Peter immediately gets on the phone, calls the nurse. He's like, hey, my wife's water just broke. And they're like, okay, like someone will be right there. The nurse checks me, and she's like, she's a 10. And my doctor's like, okay. And she looks at me and she goes, do you remember how to push? And I was like, I think so. She's like, well, let's give it a try. And so I go to do my first push, and she goes, here he is. My mom and Peter and I looked at each other, and we were like, that's it. It was absolutely insane. And there's no way, if my water had broken at home, I would have had a baby on the floor. And again, he was absolutely perfect, and he didn't have a name for the first like day and a half. So to pick a name for him, we wrote down like the letter of the alphabet, every letter of the alphabet, and for each letter we, on our own separately, wrote down our favorite name that, you know, started with that letter. And we went down, and then we sat and we compared lists, and if there were any names that matched, then those went on our list. Anyway, the doctor came in and was like, what's baby's name? And looks at me, and we looked at each other, and he was like, go ahead. I was like, his name is Oliver. So yeah, and then so he's our little Ollie. And so we brought him home. He was just very different from Maddox. Maddox was always just chill. He slept really well as a newborn. Like, I just kind of thought all newborns did that. It was not Oliver. And so he was colicky, and he had silent reflux, and he threw up nonstop, and he did not like to be laid down. He cried a lot, which Maddox cried a lot because he wasn't even 2 yet, and you know, that transition is really tough for everyone. And so the only thing that would calm him down was nursing. It was just a vicious cycle. He would nurse, and he would like nurse himself until he got sick, and then he would throw up, and then he would nurse, and then throw up. And this was just all day, all night. And at this time, Maddox's routine, he still needed us to lay with him to fall asleep, and that was just becoming impossible. And I was so upset. You know, the house was falling apart. I had a baby attached to me 24/7. I had a toddler who needed my attention, and I couldn't give it to him. I wasn't sleeping. This baby, I thought something was wrong. I didn't understand why he did this. I was super resentful because, you know, Peter didn't have to deal with all of this. It was still stressful on him in his own way, you know, but I felt like it was all on me. you know, I looked around at other people and then I started to like get upset. Like I didn't have outside help. I didn't have anyone coming over to help me. I didn't feel like I had my husband even at the time, even though he was really good about like, he would come home and immediately he'd take Maddox and he would go. So he would get him, you know, he did help, but I didn't. I just felt like my world had fallen apart. And so then on top of all of that, I was starting to, like, I regretted having another baby. I loved him so much and I would just stare at him and I would just bawl my eyes out. And all I could think was like, he deserves so much better than me. I'm a horrible mom. This baby is so innocent and I just don't have the patience to deal with him crying nonstop on top of, you know, dealing with his brother and like, I wasn't cut out for this and blah blah blah. It was just really dark and I got really depressed. I just would cry all the time and I really just didn't, truthfully, like I really didn't understand it. Like when I was going through it, I didn't understand it. And like I said, I felt still at that time, I felt like everybody else, it worked out for them and it just didn't work out for me. And I didn't understand, you know, like how come it looks like so-and-so, fucking Sally and Joe over there, they figured it out. They have more than one kid and like their house looks so clean in the background, or so many cars, or they seem so happy. You know, why don't I have a babysitter, or why don't I have more help? And I started to just like push it all out, like blaming, you know, trying to place blame anywhere that I could, and the only place that made sense was to blame myself. And so I just got really depressed and sad, and I felt like I sucked at everything, and I was a bad mom, and then in turn I was a terrible wife. I was just not fun to be around, and my house was a disaster, and I didn't think that was normal at all. And I hated my dogs. I didn't want them. I wanted them to go away, and I didn't want to take care of them anymore. And like a lot of people are gonna judge me more about that statement than anything else, and that's fine. But I felt like I was doing everything on my own, and it's because I took it all on, and I felt like that's what I was supposed to do. And so I resented everybody for not helping me, but I didn't ever once ask for help. I mean, even after I kind of, you know, was feeling better and I started to open up about the fact that I was feeling that way, people didn't know, and they were like, why didn't you tell us? You know, like we would have helped you or whatever. But I couldn't at that time. I couldn't ask for help. And so also at the time I couldn't really get out of the house. It felt impossible. I was trying to like teach Maddox how to put himself down for a nap while it was just like, it was too much for me. So I never got out. I didn't talk to people. I didn't tell anybody how much I was struggling. I just was extremely irritable. When Peter would get home, I threw things. I would yell. I'd get very upset, and he obviously just really didn't understand it. So I felt extremely, extremely alone. I didn't want to tell anybody how hard it was for me. So I just was very angry and not very fun. So I don't know. I don't even know where that changed. I think when I finally posted about it on Instagram, which sounds kind of silly, but I posted about it and it made me feel so much better that I was able to just admit it. And I started, that's what I did. I started reading a lot of blogs and looking up women on social media who were just honest about what life looked like for them, following all these people with like perfect lives who, you know, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but it was not serving me at that time. I was really comparing myself to everybody that I could, and so I started seeking out people who were honest and who had similar experiences as me, and I started to realize how absolutely normal it was. And so that's what made me decide to share my struggles, because I was like, you know, I would see people and they were just, you know, everyone would tell me like, oh my God, your boys are so cute, or your life is so cute, or I love watching you on social media. I just didn't realize that like, pretty much every single mom in the world feels all of these things, and that there was nothing wrong with me. So I was like, well, I think maybe if there are other women who feel the way that I did, if I could tell them that this is how I felt so they could feel less alone, that would be really cool. And so that's what I started doing. And the amount of support that I got and the amount of women who reached out to me and said, you know, I feel that way too, oh my gosh, I had no idea, and like, thank you for sharing this. And it really just started to become something that made me feel better, and I was like, wow, this is cool. So here we are now. I guess Maddox is 2.5, Oliver is 9 months, almost 10 months, and things are so different now. I think that that's where I want to start with you guys, and kind of just from here we can open up a conversation. I just didn't feel it to be fair to like ask everybody to share their lives without me sharing mine and my story. So I think that I'm cutting this super short, and there's a lot more that could be said, but yeah, that's where I'm gonna start. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe.